Commander Jake Martinez walked across the metal floor of his ship and looked out the big window at the dark space around them. His ship was called the New Horizon, and it was one of the smaller ships that humans used to explore new places in the galaxy. Jake had been flying ships like this for 15 years, and he had never seen anything that scared him as much as what was happening right now. A huge alien ship appeared in front of them like it came out of nowhere. The ship was 3 times bigger than anything humans had ever built, and its metal skin was black like the space around it. Jake knew this ship belonged to the Zephyrian Empire, and that meant trouble for everyone on his ship and everyone back on Earth. Lisa Brooks sat at her computer station and watched the numbers on her screen change as the alien ship got closer to them. Lisa studied alien life forms, and she had met many different types of aliens before, but the Zephyrians were not like the others. They were tall and thin with gray skin and 4 arms, and they believed that only strong species deserved to live in the galaxy. Humans were not strong in their eyes. The communication system made a loud beeping sound, and Jake pressed a button to hear what the aliens wanted to say. A deep voice spoke in the human language, but the words sounded cold and angry. The voice belonged to the commander of the alien ship, and he had a message that would change everything for the human race. The alien commander told Jake that humans had been expanding too far into space and taking planets that belonged to stronger species. He said that all human colonies in the Outer Rim territories had to be given up within 7 days, or the Zephyrian Empire would destroy every human settlement they could find. The alien also said that Earth itself might be destroyed if humans did not obey their orders. Jake looked at Lisa and saw the fear in her eyes. Everyone on the ship knew that humans were not strong enough to fight the Zephyrian Empire. Human ships were slower, and their weapons were weaker, and their technology was hundreds of years behind what the aliens had. Most people in the galaxy thought of humans as a young species that would probably not survive very long. Captain Ryan Foster was floating in space near Earth in his command ship when he got the same message from the Zephyrians. Ryan was in charge of all the human defense ships that protected Earth and the other human worlds. He looked at the list of ships under his command and counted only 12 vessels that could fight in a real battle. The Zephyrian fleet that was coming toward Earth had more than 200 warships. Ryan had been a soldier for most of his life, and he had fought in many small battles against pirates and raiders, but he had never faced anything like this. The math was simple, and it was not good for humans. Each Zephyrian ship could probably destroy 2 or 3 human ships before being damaged, and that meant the human defense fleet would be gone in less than an hour. But Ryan knew something that most humans did not know, and something that no alien in the galaxy suspected. Deep under the surface of the moon that orbited Earth, there were hidden rooms and secret machines that had been waiting for hundreds of years. Only a few humans knew about these secrets, and they had been passed down from father to son and mother to daughter for many generations. The truth about humanity was buried so deep that most humans themselves did not remember it. Earth was not really the world where humans first evolved and learned to think and build machines. Humans had come from somewhere else long ago, and they had brought knowledge with them that was now locked away and forgotten. Lisa finished reading the data from the alien ship and turned to Jake with a worried look on her face. She told him that the Zephyrian ship was scanning their vessel and trying to learn about human technology. The aliens seemed confused by what they were finding because human ships were built in ways that did not make sense to them. Jake pressed another button and sent a message back to Earth telling them about the Zephyrian threat. He knew that the leaders on Earth would have to make a choice soon, and that choice would decide whether the human race continued to exist or was wiped out by aliens who thought they were superior. On Earth, the message from Jake reached the government buildings where important people made decisions about war and peace. President Helen Wright read the message and felt her heart beat faster as she understood what was happening. She had been the leader of Earth for 6 years, and she had always hoped that humans would never have to face a threat this big. Helen walked to a special room in the deepest part of the government building where only 3 people on Earth were allowed to go. In this room there was an old computer that had not been turned on for 50 years. Helen put her hand on a metal plate and the computer recognized who she was and asked her what she wanted to do. The computer showed her a list of choices, and at the top of the list were the words Prometheus Protocol. Helen had learned about this protocol from the previous president, who had learned about it from the president before him. Every leader of Earth had been told about this secret, but none of them had ever thought they would need to use it. Helen knew that activating the Prometheus Protocol would change everything for humans and maybe for every other species in the galaxy. The protocol would unlock secrets that had been hidden for thousands of years and give humans access to knowledge and power that they had deliberately forgotten long ago. As Helen looked at the computer screen, she thought about all the humans living on Earth and on the colonies scattered across nearby star systems. She thought about children playing in parks and farmers growing food and scientists working to make life better for everyone. All of these people were counting on her to protect them from the alien threat. The Zephyrian fleet was getting closer to Earth, and their commander had made it clear that he would not accept any compromise or negotiation. The aliens saw humans as weak and inferior, and they believed that weak species should either serve stronger ones or be destroyed completely. Helen pressed the button that would activate the Prometheus Protocol and felt the computer respond to her command. Signals began traveling at the speed of light to hidden facilities on the moon and on other worlds where humans lived. Ancient machines that had been sleeping for millennia began to wake up and prepare for what was coming next. General Kevin Adams stood in a room far below the surface of the moon and watched as old machines came back to life around him. The room was bigger than a football field and filled with computers and screens that had not worked for thousands of years. When President Helen Wright activated the Prometheus Protocol, these machines began to wake up, and Kevin felt something change inside his own mind. Kevin had been the commander of the secret moon base for 10 years, but he had never been allowed to enter this deep chamber until now. His grandfather had told him stories about what lay beneath the lunar surface, but Kevin had thought they were just family legends passed down through generations. Now he could see that every story had been true. The main computer screen showed a map of all the places where humans lived throughout the galaxy. Small lights began turning on across the map as the protocol reached each human settlement. Kevin watched the lights spread from Earth to the nearby colonies and then to the distant outposts near alien space. Each light meant that more humans were about to experience the awakening. Amy Johnson was working at her communication station on the New Horizon when the change hit her like lightning. She had been trying to send a message to Earth about the Zephyrian threat when suddenly her mind expanded beyond anything she had ever imagined. Amy could feel the thoughts and emotions of every human within 1,000 light years, and it did not hurt or confuse her the way she thought it would. Instead of being overwhelmed, Amy felt like she was finally complete. She could sense Jake Martinez standing on the bridge behind her, and she knew exactly what he was thinking and feeling. She could feel Dr. Lisa Brooks working at her station and sense the excitement and fear mixing together in Lisa's mind. Most amazing of all, Amy could reach out with her thoughts and touch the minds of humans on distant worlds. Amy turned to look at Jake and saw that his eyes had changed color from brown to bright blue. She touched her own face and realized that her eyes had probably changed too. Jake walked over to her station and asked if she was feeling the same strange sensations that he was experiencing. Amy nodded and told him that she could feel something awakening in her mind, like memories that belonged to someone else. Dr. Peter Collins was alone in his laboratory on Mars when the protocol reached him. Peter had been working on energy experiments for 20 years and had always felt frustrated because human technology seemed so limited compared to what other species could do. When the awakening hit him, Peter suddenly understood why his experiments had never worked the way he wanted them to. Peter looked at the equations on his computer screen and saw that they were all wrong. Not wrong because he had made mistakes, but wrong because they were based on an incomplete understanding of how energy and matter really worked. Peter's hands began moving across his keyboard almost by themselves as new knowledge flowed into his mind from somewhere deep inside his genetic memory. Within minutes, Peter had rewritten the fundamental laws of physics that humans used to build Their machines. The new equations were so much more elegant and powerful than anything he had learned in school. Peter realized that these equations had been known to humans long ago, but had been deliberately hidden away, when his ancestors decided to start over on Earth. On Earth itself, millions of humans were experiencing similar awakenings. Children in schools began solving mathematical problems that their teachers could not understand. Engineers working on spacecraft suddenly saw new ways to make their ships faster and stronger. Scientists in laboratories found themselves understanding concepts that had puzzled humanity's greatest minds for centuries. The Zephyrian fleet commander, Admiral Crickstall, noticed the first signs that something unusual was happening when all human communications suddenly stopped. His ship had been monitoring human radio signals and computer transmissions for days as his fleet moved toward Earth. The humans had been sending frantic messages between their ships and colonies, but now there was complete silence. Admiral Crickstall called his science officer to the bridge and asked for an explanation. The science officer looked at his instruments and reported that human ships were still transmitting signals, but the signals were using frequencies and patterns that Zephyrian technology could not decode. It was as if the humans had suddenly developed a completely new form of communication. The tactical officer reported even stranger readings from the human defense fleet near Earth. The 12 human ships that had been positioned to defend their homeworld were showing energy signatures that defied everything the Zephyrians knew about physics. Some of the ships appeared to be drawing power from sources that should not exist, while others seemed to be bending space around themselves. Back on the New Horizon, Amy Johnson discovered that she could do more than just sense other human minds. She found that she could project her thoughts across vast distances and communicate with humans on other ships without using the radio. When she reached out to contact Captain Ryan Foster on his command ship near Earth, she felt his mind respond. Immediately, Ryan told Amy through their mental connection that his ships were changing in ways he did not understand. The hulls were becoming stronger, and the engines were producing more power than their designs should allow. The weapon systems were reconfiguring themselves and displaying capabilities that had never existed before. Ryan said it felt like the ships were remembering how they were supposed to work. Dr. Lisa Brooks made an important discovery while studying the biological changes happening to the humans on their ship. Lisa found that human DNA was activating genetic sequences that had been dormant for millennia. These sequences contained information about advanced technologies and capabilities that seemed impossible, according to everything science had taught them about human evolution. Lisa realized that humans were not evolving forward, but rather returning to a previous state that they had somehow lost or abandoned. The genetic locks that had kept these abilities suppressed were being removed by the Prometheus protocol, and humans were becoming what they had been before they came to Earth. General Kevin Adams received reports from human colonies throughout the galaxy describing similar transformations. On every world where humans lived, people were discovering new abilities and understanding technologies that had seemed beyond their reach just hours before. Ancient knowledge was returning to the human race, and with it came power that other species had never imagined humans could possess. The Zephyrian Empire had made a critical error in threatening humanity at this moment. They had no way of knowing that their ultimatum would trigger the awakening of something that had been sleeping in human genetics for 50,000 years. Admiral Crickstall and his fleet were about to discover that the weak species they had planned to destroy was actually something far more ancient and powerful than anything else in the galaxy. Colonel Steve Harris walked down a metal tunnel that went deeper into the Earth than any human had been for thousands of years. The tunnel had opened by itself when Steve approached the sealed entrance in the Rocky Mountains. Steve knew exactly where to go, even though he had never been in these tunnels before, because the knowledge was now flowing through his mind like water through a broken dam. The walls around Steve were made of a material that looked like metal but felt warm to the touch. Strange symbols covered the walls, and Steve could read them as easily as if they were written in English. The symbols told the story of his ancestors and explained why they had hidden these weapons and machines so far underground. Steve reached a massive door that was 50 feet tall and made of the same warm metal as the tunnel walls. The door had no handle or visible way to open it, but when Steve placed his hand against the surface, the metal began to glow with soft blue light. The door split down the middle and opened slowly to reveal a chamber so large that Steve could not see the far wall. Inside the chamber were machines and weapons that defied everything Steve thought he knew about technology. Ships hung in the air without any visible support, and weapons that looked like pieces of art were arranged in perfect rows. Steve walked between these ancient artifacts and felt his ancestors speaking to him through genetic memories that were finally unlocked. The first ship that Steve examined was smaller than a human fighter, but when he climbed inside, he found controls that seemed to respond to his thoughts rather than his hands. The ship's computer activated when Steve sat in the pilot's seat and began showing him displays that explained how to fly vessels that could travel faster than light without using any of the clumsy hyperspace technology that other species relied on. Meanwhile, on the surface above Steve, the first new human ship was emerging from a hidden shipyard beneath the Pacific Ocean. The ship was called the Eternal Dawn, and it was unlike anything that had ever existed in the galaxy. Captain Michelle Lee stood on its bridge and marveled at the controls that seemed to blend technology with something that felt almost like magic. Michelle had been flying cargo ships between Earth and the nearby colonies for 12 years, but she had never imagined commanding a vessel like this. The ship's hull was made of living metal that could repair itself when damaged and adapt to any weapon that tried to harm it. The engines did not burn fuel, but instead drew energy directly from the fabric of space itself. The Eternal Dawn was 3 miles long, but it moved through space like a dancer moving through water. Michelle discovered that she could control the ship by thinking about where she wanted to go rather than pressing buttons or moving control sticks. The ship seemed to understand her intentions and respond to her will as if it were an extension of her own body. Engineer Danny Clark was working frantically in the shipyards orbiting Earth as more ancient knowledge flowed into his mind every minute. Danny had been building and repairing human ships for 20 years, but now he understood that everything he had learned was just a crude imitation of what human technology could really accomplish. Danny watched in amazement as the ships around him began to change and evolve. Hull plating that had taken weeks to install was now reshaping itself in minutes. Engines that had required teams of specialists to maintain were rebuilding themselves with capabilities that exceeded anything in their original designs. Weapon systems were appearing on ships that had never been designed to carry weapons. The transformation was happening so fast that Danny could barely keep track of all the changes. Ships that had been built for carrying cargo were becoming vessels capable of fighting entire fleets. Exploration ships were developing the ability to travel to distant galaxies in hours rather than years. Even the smallest human vessels were becoming more powerful than the largest alien warships. Admiral Crichton stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the reports coming in from his intelligence officers. Every piece of information about human capabilities that the Zephyrian Empire had collected over the past 3 centuries was now completely useless. Human ships were appearing in star systems that should have taken them months to reach, and they were using technologies that violated every known law of physics. The Admiral's science officer reported that human vessels were now showing energy readings that exceeded anything the Zephyrians had ever recorded. Some ships appeared to exist in multiple dimensions at the same time, while others seemed to be drawing power from sources that the Zephyrian instruments could not even detect or measure. Most disturbing of all, the human ships were not just becoming more powerful, but they were also becoming more numerous. Zephyrian scouts reported that new human vessels were emerging from hidden facilities throughout human space. Planets that the aliens had thought were barely inhabited were revealing massive shipyards and weapons factories that had been concealed beneath their surfaces. Admiral Crichton demanded answers from his staff, but none of his officers could explain what was happening. The Zephyrian Empire had been studying human technology for decades, and they had concluded that humans were at least 500 years behind Zephyrian science. Now it appeared that human technology was advancing beyond anything the Zephyrians could comprehend. The Admiral's tactical officer reported that the human defense fleet near Earth had grown from 12 ships to over 300 in just 6 hours. The new ships were larger and more advanced than anything in the Zephyrian fleet, and they were continuing to multiply as more vessels emerged from hidden bases throughout the solar system. Colonel Steve Harris climbed into the cockpit of a fighter that had been waiting in the underground chamber for 50,000 years. The ship responded to his presence by activating systems that had been dormant since before human civilization had existed on Earth. Steve felt the ship's artificial intelligence merge with his consciousness, and suddenly he had access to the combat experience of 1,000 ancient pilots. The fighter rose from the underground chamber and burst through the Earth's surface without causing any damage to the rock and soil above. Steve found himself flying through space in a vessel that could travel between stars as easily as driving a car down a highway. The ship's weapons could destroy entire fleets with a single shot, but Steve knew that such power came with terrible responsibility. Dr. Lisa Brooks detected the emergence of the first ancient fighters on her instruments aboard the New Horizon. She counted over 1,000 individual ships rising from hidden bases on Earth alone, and her readings suggested that similar launches were happening throughout human space. Each ship was more advanced than anything humanity had built during their 3 centuries of SPACEFLIGHT. Lisa realized that the human race had not been expanding into the galaxy for the first time, but was actually returning to territory that had once belonged to their ancestors. The aliens who had dismissed humans as a primitive species had unknowingly been living in a galaxy that humans had ruled long before any of the current civilizations had even evolved. President Helen Wright stood in front of a camera that would broadcast her message to every intelligent species in the galaxy. The technology she was using was older than most civilizations and more advanced than anything the current galactic powers possessed. Helen's words would reach every corner of known space instantly through methods that made conventional communication systems look like smoke signals. Helen had spent the last 3 days learning about humanity's true history from the ancient computers that had awakened along with the rest of the human race. The knowledge was overwhelming, but she understood now why her ancestors had chosen to forget their past and start fresh on a distant blue world. The power they had once wielded was so absolute that it had corrupted them and led to terrible wars that nearly destroyed all life in the galaxy. As Helen began to speak, she felt the weight of 50,000 years of history resting on her shoulders. She told the listening galaxy that humanity was not the young and weak species that everyone believed them to be. Instead, they were the descendants of the predecessors who had once ruled every star and planet that any living being could see in the night sky. The message sent shockwaves through every government and military command center in the galaxy. Leaders who had dismissed humans as insignificant primitives suddenly found themselves scrambling through ancient archives and historical records. What they discovered in those dusty files filled them with terror, because every civilization had legends about the predecessors, and those legends spoke of power beyond imagination. Admiral Crickstall received the broadcast while his fleet was still approaching Earth, and he felt his confidence crumble as he listened to the human president's words. The Zephyrian Empire had built its reputation on being the strongest military force in the galaxy, but their oldest historical records contained warnings about the ancient race that had vanished long before the Zephyrians had developed space travel. The Admiral looked at his tactical displays and saw that his fleet of 200 warships was now facing over 1,000 human vessels that had appeared seemingly from nowhere. The human ships were arranged in perfect formations that surrounded the Zephyrian fleet from every direction. Each human vessel was larger and more advanced than anything the Zephyrians had ever built. Captain Michelle Lee stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn and felt the awesome responsibility of commanding a weapon that could reshape entire solar systems. The ship's living metal hull pulsed with energy patterns that existed in dimensions beyond normal space and time. Michelle knew that her vessel alone was more powerful than the entire Zephyrian fleet, but she also understood that such power had to be used wisely. Michelle opened a communication channel to Admiral Crickstall. and spoke in a voice that carried harmonics and frequencies that Zephyrian ears could barely detect. She told the admiral that his fleet had entered human space with hostile intentions and that he had exactly 1 hour to withdraw his forces or face the consequences of challenging the children of the predecessors. The smaller galactic powers responded to President Wright's message with immediate surrender broadcasts. The Cortani Federation had found references to the predecessors in their most sacred texts, and those references described beings who could create and destroy stars with their thoughts. The Veil Collective's historians discovered ancient warnings carved into the oldest monuments on their homeworld, telling future generations never to anger the sleeping giants. The Silicon Hierarchy's computer networks began displaying data files that had been hidden in their deepest memory cores for millions of years. These files contained detailed accounts of the predecessor civilization and its voluntary departure from galactic affairs. The Silicon leadership immediately began broadcasting messages of friendship and cooperation toward human space. Dr. Gary Thompson stood on the bridge of the research vessel Quantum Leap and prepared to demonstrate a fraction of humanity's restored capabilities. Gary had been a theoretical physicist before the awakening, but now he possessed knowledge that made Einstein's theories look like children's drawings. The ship he commanded could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level with precision that bordered on miraculous. Gary focused his thoughts on the Zephyrian flagship and began to alter the fundamental forces that held the alien ship together. He did not want to destroy the vessel or harm its crew, but simply to show them that their weapons and defenses were useless against technology that operated beyond their understanding of physics. Admiral Crichton watched in horror as every system aboard his flagship began to shut down in sequence. The shutdown was not caused by any external attack, but seemed to be happening because the ship's own technology was refusing to function. Lights went out quarter by quarter and weapon systems powered down one by one until the massive warship was floating helplessly in space. The same thing was happening throughout the Zephyrian fleet as human technology demonstrated its superiority not through violence but through gentle domination. Human ships were somehow convincing Zephyrian technology to recognize the authority of its creators' descendants and stop working against them. It was as if the alien machines remembered who had originally taught their builders how to create them. Commander Jake Martinez watched from the New Horizon as the confrontation unfolded around him. The ship he had commanded for so many years was now transforming into something that barely resembled its original design. The hull had become sleek and graceful, while new weapon systems emerged from spaces that had previously been empty corridors. Jake could feel the ship's new artificial intelligence speaking directly to his mind and explaining capabilities that seemed more like magic than technology. The vessel could now travel to any point in the galaxy instantly without using hyperspace tunnels or conventional engines. Its weapons could target specific molecules and enemy ships while leaving the crews completely unharmed. Amy Johnson used her enhanced mental abilities to monitor communications throughout the Zephyrian fleet, and she could sense the growing panic among the alien crews. The Zephyrians had built their entire culture around the belief that military strength determined which species deserved to survive and prosper. Now they were discovering that they were facing opponents who possessed strength beyond anything they had imagined possible. The hour that Captain Michelle Lee had given Admiral Crichton was almost over, and the Zephyrian commander had to make a choice that would determine the fate of his entire civilization. He could order his fleet to attack and be destroyed by weapons that operated outside the normal laws of physics, or he could surrender to a species that his people had planned to exterminate. Just days before, Admiral Crichton opened a communication channel to the human fleet and transmitted a message that no Zephyrian leader had ever been forced to send. He announced the complete and unconditional surrender of his forces and requested permission to withdraw from human space without further conflict. The admiral who had come to destroy Earth was now begging for mercy from the descendants of the galaxy's former rulers. Ambassador Nicole Davis walked into the Great Hall where representatives from every known species in the galaxy had gathered to witness the birth of a new cosmic order. 6 months had passed since the Prometheus Protocol had awakened humanity's true nature, and the galaxy was still adjusting to the reality that the species they had once ignored now held absolute power over everything they could see in the night sky. Nicole had been a simple trade negotiator before the awakening, but now she carried the authority to speak for the most advanced civilization that had ever existed. The hall where she stood was built using human technology that could manipulate matter at the atomic level and create materials stronger than anything found in nature. The building itself was alive in ways that other species could barely comprehend. The new Galactic Council was nothing like the old empire-based system that had dominated politics for thousands of years. Instead of powerful species ruling over weaker ones, the new Federation was built on principles of cooperation and mutual benefit. Humanity served as the final arbiters of disputes, but they used their power to protect rather than control the countless civilizations that filled the galaxy. Dr. Sandra Miller stood in a medical research facility that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and worked with alien scientists to develop treatments for diseases that had plagued their species for millennia. Sandra had been a family doctor on Earth before the awakening, but now she possessed knowledge of biological processes that made her more qualified than the greatest medical minds of 100 different worlds. The research facility used human technology to examine living cells at levels of detail that other species had never imagined possible. Sandra could watch individual molecules interacting inside alien bodies and design medicines that would target specific problems without causing any harmful side effects. Diseases that had killed billions of beings throughout galactic history were now being cured with treatments that took only minutes to develop. Engineer Tony Rodriguez supervised the construction of massive space habitats that could house entire civilizations while maintaining perfect ecological balance. Tony had built simple structures on human colonies before the awakening, but now he was creating artificial worlds that were more beautiful and functional than most natural planets. Each habitat was a work of art that combined the architectural styles of dozens of different species with human technology that could support billions of inhabitants. The habitats drew their energy from the quantum foam that filled empty space and used gravity manipulation to create environments where any type of being could live comfortably regardless of their biological needs. Captain Jake Martinez now commanded the Harmony, a vessel that served multiple purposes as both a diplomatic ship and a demonstration of humanity's peaceful intentions. The ship was beautiful beyond description, with a hull that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight and engines that left trails of rainbow colors as it moved through space. Jake used the Harmony to visit worlds where conflicts had raged for centuries and help their inhabitants find peaceful solutions to their differences. The ship's reality-shaping engines could terraform dead planets in days, rather than centuries, and create new homes for refugees from war-torn systems. Jake had become something between a diplomat and a miracle worker as he traveled throughout the galaxy, bringing hope to species that had given up on peace. The former, Admiral Crixtal, now served as a liaison between the reformed Zephyrian Republic and the Terran Federation, and he had come to understand why humanity's ancestors had once chosen to give up their incredible power. Crixtal had spent months studying human history and learning about the wars that had nearly destroyed all life in the galaxy 50,000 years ago. Crixtal now worked to help his own people adapt to a universe where strength was measured not by the ability to destroy, but by the wisdom to create and protect. The Zephyrian military had been transformed from a force of conquest into an organization dedicated to exploration and scientific research. Many former Zephyrian warriors now worked alongside human engineers to build the space habitats that would house displaced populations throughout the galaxy. Dr. Lisa Brooks made her most important discovery while working at the new Galactic Research Institute, where scientists from every known species collaborated on projects that would benefit all life in the universe. Lisa found evidence in the ancient human archives that the predecessors had not only sealed away their own technological capabilities, but had also planted similar genetic locks in dozens of other species throughout the galaxy. Lisa realized that Humanity's awakening was just the beginning of a transformation that would eventually affect every intelligent species in the known universe. The predecessors had learned from their past mistakes and had designed a system that would allow power to return gradually as each species proved that they were ready to use it responsibly. The discovery meant that someday the Zephyrians and the Cortani and even the youngest species in the galaxy would have access to technologies and abilities similar to what humans now possessed. But they would only gain these capabilities when they had evolved beyond the need to use power for domination and learned to see strength as a tool for protection and creation. President Helen Wright stood in her office on Luna and looked out at the stars with a mixture of pride and responsibility weighing on her mind. The galaxy had been transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible just months before, but Helen knew that the real work was just beginning. Humanity had been given a second chance to use their power wisely and to guide other species toward a future where cooperation replaced competition and wisdom replaced strength as the measure of a civilization's worth. The humans who had once been dismissed as weak and primitive were now the guardians of a galactic community that included trillions of beings from thousands of different worlds. Helen thought about the children playing in parks on Earth and in the colonies scattered throughout human space. These children would grow up in a universe where war between species was becoming a thing of the past and where the greatest adventures lay not in conquest but in exploration and discovery. The ancient archives had revealed that the galaxy contained millions of species that had never been contacted by any of the major civilizations. Human ships were now making peaceful contact with these isolated worlds and offering them the chance to join the galactic community as equals rather than subjects. The sealed power that had once commanded the stars through fear and domination was now being used to nurture and protect the vast garden of life that flourished in the cosmic darkness. Humanity had learned that true strength came not from the ability to destroy but from the wisdom to create and the courage to choose peace even when power made war seem easier. The aliens who had once panicked at the revelation of humanity's true nature now looked to Earth's children as teachers and protectors. The galaxy had been transformed not through conquest but through the recognition that all life was precious, and that the greatest civilizations were those that used their abilities to help others reach their full potential.